America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt live at Studio North. I must tell you, the stories out of Florida are heartbreaking as the death toll approaches 50. I don't know if it rose overnight. There hasn't been an update from the 48 in Florida yesterday. The stories that emerged from the ground from Fort Myers region, from Sanibel Island, are horrific. The Washington Post covered Sanibel yesterday. Their paradise lost to Ian Sanibel. Residents hope its spirit survive. Pine Island is cut off. Fort Myers is in ruins, and the effort to rebuild will take quite a long time. My colleague Mike Gallagher is on the scene. We'll be broadcasting today from the destruction, raising money for the people in the neighborhood who are down and out with the benefit food for the poor. So tune in to Mike Gallagher to listen to that later today. Other news from around the world. Brazil voted yesterday, and what a surprise, the pollsters were wrong. Bolsonaro, the incumbent president, who was expected to get less than 40% of the vote, got 43.2%, and the former president, the left-winger, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, just known as Lula, won 48.4% of the votes. And so they got to go to a runoff. And this was supposed to be done, and there was supposed to be a fork in it. Now people are saying, how did the pollsters get it so wrong? It sounds like the American electorate, on the day after any election that has happened in the last 10 years, it is increasingly conservative, that a large segment, increasingly clear that a large segment of all populations do not talk to pollsters, and they are almost always on the right. So that polling has a bug, which is now a feature that they can't fix. And therefore, I have to ask again, why do we ever carry any polling as news as opposed to the direction of polls? Senator Ron Johnson will be my guest later in the day. Direction of his race is very positive. Looks like he's running away with it as Mandela Barnes gets exposed for the radical that he is in Wisconsin. But the polls don't reflect that. They do grudgingly admit they don't want to be too far wrong. Adam Laxalt is way ahead in Nevada, and so even the Nevada Independent, run by John Ralston, who's a friend of mine but hates Adam Laxalt, even he had to admit Laxalt's got a lead. And, well, there's other stories on it. 92 people have been killed in Iran over Masha Amini's death and the protests that have followed. 92 people, minimum. That comes from the Norway-based Iran Human Rights NGO. The violence continues. Cargo ship owners cancel sailings as global trade flips from backlogs to empty containers. Wall Street Journal reporting that ocean carriers are canceling dozens of sailings on the world's busiest routes during what is normally their peak season. The latest sign of the economic whiplash hitting companies as inflation weighs on global trade and spending. So what Joe Biden unleashed on the world with his unnecessary $7 trillion in spending in the last 2 years has now brought about a global recession. Putin's war added to this, of course, but the global recession is stagflation at its worst, and it's all got Biden's name on it. Retail investors are warned on piling into risky alternative products. I'm going to talk to David Rubenstein, famed co-founder of the Carlyle Group, on his new book, How to Invest, later today. And one of those things we'll cover is that retail investors are being told, don't try and make up what you lost in the Biden market. Don't do that by getting into risky stuff. In Russia, actually in Ukraine, all is going well for the Ukrainian army. President Zelensky has hailed advances made over the weekend in the town, near the town, and around the town of Lyman, Lyman. Russian troops fled. Some are still being rounded up in Lyman this morning. Ukrainians rejoice. They're feasting on Russian supplies. Meanwhile, the military policies of Russia are under ferocious attack within Russia, something you don't see very much. When the New York Times does a headline, Ukrainian troops hunt demoralized Russian stragglers in Sea City, they don't expect it to mirror what is going on in Russia. And over at the Institute for the Study of War, their daily update on Russia's war in Ukraine, the most important thing today is that the information war that Russia has been used has fallen apart. Quote, the Russian information space has significantly deviated from the narratives preferred by the Kremlin and the Russian Ministry of Defense, that things are generally under control, A current onslaught of criticism and reporting of operational military details by the Kremlin's propagandists has come to resemble Millblogger discourse over the past week. The Kremlin narrative had focused on general statements of progress and avoided detailed discussions of current military operation. The Kremlin has never openly recognized a major failure in the war prior to its devastating loss in the Kharkiv Oblast, which prompted the partial reserve mobilization. So they are on the run. But Jens Stoltenberg of NATO had to come out yesterday and warn, because President Biden can't carry this off, of severe consequences if Russia uses nuclear weapons. Because the leader of Chechnya is urging Putin to do just that. I don't think we've been this close to the use of a tactical nuclear weapon since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world doesn't seem to notice. They do notice, though, that wherever Russia withdraws, they find torture sites. 10 torture sites, according to AP News, found in Izium, where the Russians have been routed out. I mentioned to you that Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Great Britain, has repealed the 45% tax hike cut. Indonesian soccer game yesterday, they had a stampede that left 125 people dead. Israel did make some progress with Lebanon over the weekend. They have got an unprecedented approval for a maritime border. And as I'm going to talk about for most of the next few segments, the Supreme Court comes back today. The first Monday in October, the Supremes are back on the bench. Nevada Democrats see signs of a nightmare scenario, Latino voters staying home. You know what? They're not staying home. They're going to come and vote for the Republicans. Victor Davis Hanson yesterday, in a long piece for PJ Media, which I suggest you go and find, presents a very dire assessment of America right now, which is backed up by the incompetence at every level of the Biden administration. And in an interesting note, yesterday, a Navy judge cleared seaman recruit Ryan Mays of all charges over the fire that engulfed the USS Bonhomme Richard in 2020. The sailor, who was just on watch duty, has long protested his innocence. And the Navy is now very embarrassed, I mean deeply embarrassed, I would guess, that there was an attempted fall guy. That's what it sounds like. For 6 months, the Navy investigated a sailor other than Seaman Mays, and there was lots of evidence that the seaman just wasn't the one responsible, but Navy Justice, they were looking for somebody, and they haven't got the right guy, and the mystery of the lost $1.2 billion ship will continue. Live from Studio North, Jake Sherman joins me with Punchbowl News. I follow Jake on Twitter, and every morning Punchbowl News sends its morning report to me, and I read it. Good morning, Jake. Good Monday to you. First Monday in October.
Happy Monday. It is 36 days from the midterm election.
And the Supreme Court is actually about its business. Now, unlike a lot of the websites and news sources cited in this morning's Punchbowl News, I don't think the Supreme Court's in a difficult time. I think it's past a difficult time. That the worst decision of my lifetime, Roe v. Wade, had to eventually be reversed. It was reversed, and now the court's going to move on to other fundamental errors of the Burger Court era, the Burger and Rehnquist Court era, and get them fixed, Jake, including affirmative action. Why do you think so much of blue bubble media is so alarmed by where this court is going?
I don't think I can't speak for anybody, and I can't speak for anybody else besides myself and my partners and my colleagues at Punchbowl News. Excuse me. I think that when you have justices trading barbs over the legitimacy of the court, that's not good. I mean, the Supreme Court, generally speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hugh, has had widespread approval and trust in our lifetime, my lifetime at least, and that has taken a hit. Our judgment was not on the decisions and whether the decisions were proper or improper. It was on the simple fact that the court has taken a hit and justices are trading shots publicly about the legitimacy of the court.
Now, Jake, I've been teaching con law since 1995, and I know that the Supreme Court justices frequently do public speeches which are misunderstood by the press as being shots at each other when they are, in fact, explanations of their own jurisprudence. Stephen Breyer sat down with me for 2 hours, and we had an argument in which we changed shots. Didn't hurt Justice Breyer's opinion of my show or my opinion of Justice Breyer. Brilliant guy, now retired. What is going on is a fundamental recalibration, which puts the court back on a constitutionalist path, going away from legislative enactments, which marked the Berger-Rehnquist years, and before that, the Warren Court. So this is long overdue. It's been expected and campaigned on by Republicans for a long time, but the left doesn't like it. I get that. They don't like the administrative state being corralled, but the only way to get growth back and freedom back in this country is to do what the court is doing, grasping the nettle. So I think as an issue, the Democrats hurt themselves when they proposed expanding the court. I think they hurt themselves when they talk about the court being outrageous and an assassin shows up at Brett Kavanaugh's house. I think the court always helps Republicans and always hurts Democrats, and the election, as you say, is 36 days away.
I will say this, though, Hugh. I've never really understood. I do understand, but I think it's foolish strategy to talk about expanding the Supreme Court because it's not going to happen. There's no. I think you would agree that there's no configuration of the Senate that and the House, for that matter, that would agree to expanding the court. Nothing that we see. I mean, the days of 65 seats in the Senate are not coming back, or not. Democratic seats in the Senate. That's not it doesn't seem to be a reality. So
well, that's why I wonder why Mark Kelly, Maggie Hassan, Raphael Warnock, three, and Cortez Masto are so reluctant to talk about breaking the filibuster. They won't talk about that. They're not asked about that. They're not put on the hot seat about breaking the filibuster. They dodge. They dodge, and mainstream media allows them to get away with dodging. But the reason they won't talk about it is because they're obliged by the left side of their party to say they'll consider it, or at least not to rule it out. Have any of those four taken a cinema or Manchin-like stance on the filibuster, Jake?
No, I don't have their comments handy because this has not been an issue we've been focused on in the last couple months because it's not top of mind for anybody or top of the agenda. I think what Kelly has said is he would look at it, so that's a dodge. And I think what Warnock has said is on voting rights, he would support it. Excuse me. So that's, without getting into the intricacies of the filibuster, you really can't there's no real way to carve out a certain issue from the filibuster. They've done it with the debt limit, I believe, but they did it in a different way. They basically said they passed legislation that indicated they could pass the debt limit with 51 votes. Now, they could do that with the Voting Rights Act or with voting rights legislation. They have chosen not, or they've not been able to so far.
Yeah, Jake, the reason it's not top of mind, which is a fair phrase to use, inside the Beltway is they don't want to talk about what hurts them politically. And inside the Beltway, the left is ascendant over most media organizations, not Punchbowl News, and the left doesn't want to talk about, for example, let me play for you Carrie Lake yesterday. She gets a question from a reporter about abortion. She flips the script, cut number 11.
I support saving as many lives as possible. And what I really want to know, and I've been waiting, I tune into you guys all the time. I want to know where Katie Hobbs stands, but I never hear you guys ask her that. I'm pro-life. My plan would be that every woman who walks into an abortion clinic know that there are options out there. They don't have to choose that. There's families who would love to adopt a baby. And right now, the way it's been going, they go in and they only have one option.
That's it.
Nobody tells them that there's other options. We want to help our women. If they're afraid, we want to help them. We want to give women health care, and I want to help people. But I really challenge you, and I'm happy to get back to you on this, when you find out where Katie Hobbs stands, because let me tell you where she stands. She supports abortion right up until birth and after birth.
That's right.
She supports if a baby survives a botched abortion, that baby die on a cold metal tray.
True.
And none of you ever try to get her to talk about her stance. So get back to
So
her.
that is, Jake, that is Carrie Lake going after the media, which goes after Katie Hobbs. And obviously, the late-term abortion is not top of mind in the Beltway, but it is top of mind among many pro-life voters across the United States. It's just they never get it aired out inside the Beltway, which is the reason I think Walter Russell Mead is so on point about where Trumpism comes from is it's this disconnect between elite media and the average American.
Yeah, I think that this is something we've heard more and more from Republicans in recent weeks. Why don't you ask member X or candidate Y what their stance is on abortion, Democratic candidate or Democratic member? I will say, Hugh, I don't actually think that it's a mystery where Democrats stand on abortion. I mean, I don't think. I think by and large, they're not being asked. I think is a false argument because most people understand where Democrats are in abortion.
Where are they where do you think they are? Unlimited abortion up to the 9th month?
I don't know that that's everybody. No, I think most. I think most Democrats are. I don't know it's tough to paint the entire party with one brush, just like you can't paint the entire Republican Party with one brush.
No, but I think I don't care about whataboutism here, Jake. What my point is, nobody asked Democrats what I just did and what Carrie Lake did to the reporter because they don't want to put them in a tough spot. It's considered bad form to put Democrats in a tough spot.
I don't think that's right. I think that I respectfully, I don't think that's right. I think that most people understand where Democrats are on abortion, and I think it's but I hear the argument. I understand the argument that's become more prominent in recent weeks.
Oh, so my whole point is that polling everything is got a systemic flaw that makes it lean left, project left-wing results, not by a lot, maybe 5 to 7%, but it happened in Brazil yesterday. Now, you don't cover Brazil. You're a Punchbowl News is not. But did you know the big miss that happened in the polling in Brazil? It's another big miss by polling.
I saw this morning, but to be honest, I was not following that one iota. I got enough problems here.
Yeah, well, it's just another big miss by polling, which I think applies everywhere. Jake, let me close by talking about big tech. We're not going to get a bill this year. We're not going to get a bill next year. Are we ever going to get a bill regulating big tech?
Well, this year I don't think it's even going to come up for a vote in the Senate. I'm not entirely sure. I do think the question I get a lot, Hugh, is that what will Republicans do when it comes to big tech beyond investigations? And I think that's an open question. I think it's a fair question to ask. We know that Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who will chair the Energy and Commerce Committee, should Republicans take the majority. Jim Jordan, who will chair the Judiciary Committee, should Republicans take the majority. We know that they are going to be very, very interested on hauling in big tech CEOs and big tech honchos to their committee. What we don't know is whether there's a space for some legislation on any aspect of big tech. I don't know in divided government whether that's a possibility. I don't know that Republicans are incredibly focused on what bill they would put forth now or whether President Biden would sign it. But as we note this morning in Punchbowl News this AM, there is just widespread kind of disagreement or lack of knowledge on the Klobuchar-Grassley bill, which has been kind of sitting in the Senate for a couple months.
And in fact, that is going to be the only vehicle available. And I do not see anything happening under Leader McConnell back in the majority or Speaker McCarthy that Joe Biden would agree with. So big tech profits by paralysis. They're in the paralysis business and on the Hill at least, and they're going to get what they want. Jake Sherman, follow him on Twitter. Go to punchbowlnews.com. Sign up for the free email that you get every single morning. First thing I read in the morning, Punchbowl News. Thank you, Jake. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning to you on this first broadcast day of October. If you're a new listener, it is often our luck to have Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin join us. Good morning, Senator Johnson. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. I'm doing well. Hope you are too.
I am. I assume you're in Wisconsin and working hard on the 36 days before the election. When does voting start in Wisconsin?
Well, we already have absentee ballots being mailed out, and we have early voting 2 weeks before the election. So it's game on.
Game on. I want to talk about Mandela Barnes, your radical opponent, tied with John Fetterman for the most radical people I've ever seen run for office. And I want to begin with a conversation I just had with Jake Sherman about whether or not blue bubble media and legacy media ever confront Democrats with their worst positions. The answer is no. You and I, by the way, I think it's fair, Senator, we've gone a few rounds on this show, haven't we?
I think that's true. That's fine.
And that's fine.
I don't agree with anybody 100%, sure.
And I ask you tough questions. I want to know, has Mandela Barnes been asked by Wisconsin media or national media if he supports ending the filibuster?
Well, first of all, he hasn't made himself available to be asked. Since he won the primary, I think he's at most given maybe 4 interviews and a couple questions at a time, as opposed to me. I've been on shows like this more than 100 times since he was chosen as the candidate, and I've had numerous different what they call press gaggles, that type of thing. I'm an open book. I think it's my responsibility to the voters here in Wisconsin to let them know what I believe on issues. Mandela Barnes is a radical leftist hiding in sheep's clothing, he can't afford for Wisconsinites to know what his true beliefs are. So he's in hiding. The guy is in they've deep sixed him. They don't want him to talk to the press. They want to run these cutesy little ads, make him seem like some little moderate. He's not a moderate. He's a radical leftist.
Oh, he's such a radical. Now, how about you? Do you support the filibuster still?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I think the last time it came up, probably the best way to describe it is the reason we have a filibuster, and the best way to describe that is it requires a larger majority to pass significant legislation. Well, quite honestly, any legislation, but it's really meant if you're going to do something game-changing, if you're going to do something that has a big impact on society, long-lasting, you need a large majority in the Senate, which is representative of the United States. You know, you need the people behind it. You can't be doing these things on a purely partisan basis, or you're just going to be ping-ponging back and forth. You know, with each new majority, you're going to overturn something, and that just creates an instability in our society. So the Senate, from my standpoint, is meant to provide some stability to our society. Hugh, coming from the private sector, stability is so important to economic activity. The worst thing is, you know, swings in pricing. You want stable pricing. You want stability. And that's what the filibuster provides.
Now, the filibuster also protects the rule of law by preserving the Supreme Court at 9, but every Democrat in the United States Senate, except Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, voted to end the filibuster. That means Raphael Warnock, Maggie Hassan, Cortez Masto in Nevada, Patty Murray in Washington State, Michael Bennet in Colorado. We have to assume Mandela Barnes would vote to end the filibuster and would vote to expand the Supreme Court. That's the only rational attribution to him that we can make, isn't it? Not Senator Johnson. I don't want to be unfair, but I think that's exactly what he would do.
No, he said he wants to end the filibuster. It's just one of his election planks. I mean, he wants to end the filibuster. And, of course, those Democrats you talked about, I think 35 of them, when Donald Trump became president and we were in the same position where we had majorities in the House and the Senate, they wrote a letter together with Susan Collins begging McConnell and congressional leadership, do not end the filibuster. Don't change the Senate. And then 4 years later, here they are. Let's change the Senate. Let's take advantage of this political moment. But I mean, just think of this thing ahead. If you start packing the Supreme Court with one party majority in the Senate, what's going to happen when the other party takes over? Are you going to go from 9 justices to 13 to 17? I mean, where would this end?
It doesn't.
It ought to end right now.
Yeah, well put. Has Mandela Barnes stated his position on late-term abortion? Because I haven't heard any Democrat asked by any legacy media reporter, do you support abortion up to the moment of birth? Because they do.
Right. That is the Democrat position. No limits on abortion whatsoever. An unborn child has no right to life. That is the Democrat position. No, he's not been asked that because he's in hiding. There's no opportunity to ask him that question.
You see, I find this astonishing that legacy media is so not aware of Mandela Barnes' strategy. They know John Fetterman is hiding because he had a stroke and can't talk. But now I want to finish on Mandela Barnes. Affirmative action, counting by race, admitting people to college based upon their racial identity. Where are you standing on that, Senator? What do you want the Supreme Court to do with the Harvard case? And has Mandela Barnes said anything about affirmative action?
Well, I thought, back in the 60s there, when Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, I thought that was a goal we pretty well all accepted, that we really want to move to a society where we judge people based on the content of their character rather than the color of the skin. And, Hugh, I'm 67 years old. I've seen a great deal of progress. There has always been racism. There always probably will be racism. But, we really have moved toward a colorblind society until the left is trying to resegregate the society. And they're doing it through college admissions. They're doing it with critical race theory in our schools. I mean, to me, it seems it's just so unfortunate what the left is trying to do in terms of dividing this nation. We're not the dividers. Conservatives are not the dividers. We're not the angry ones. We're highly concerned. We're passionate about trying to save this country. But it is the left that wants to fundamentally transform America. And one of those fundamental transformations seems to be resegregation of society. I think it's just tragic.
Counting by race, we are the same age. I mean, you're younger than you, but we're the same age. And indeed, until affirmative action was reintroduced, I thought this battle was fought, that no one would be discriminated. And if Harvard has to be 100% Asian American because they get the best test scores, fine. If it has to be 100% black because they get the best applications, fine. None of it matters to me. An individual's color doesn't matter, Senator Johnson, but that appears to be a distinctly minority view in the United States Senate now.
Well, I'm not sure exactly where the Senate stands, but from my standpoint, we need to be that colorblind society. We need to judge people by the content of their character, and that, by the way, that's what's going to be best for society. You don't want to admit somebody. You don't want to admit somebody into a college where they are going to fail. You want to admit them into a institutional learning where they will succeed. And if you're doing it based on some other criteria than ability, you're harming that individual as well. It's not good for anybody.
Now, I want to conclude by talking about the Supreme Court is back today, so I'm focused on the court. 303 Creative is a case before it defending the rights of a website designer in Colorado not to put together a website for a same-sex wedding. Gladly serves gay clients, gladly serves everyone in the LGBT community, but doesn't do same-sex wedding websites. The state of Colorado thinks she's violating the law. The 10th Circuit agreed. It's going up to the Supreme Court, and I'm hoping that my sponsors, the Alliance Defending Freedom, successfully defend her right to free speech. What is it about the left that they cannot stand people not bending the knee to their belief system?
Do they not have confidence in it? I'm not quite sure. We're conservative, so we really are the live and let live party. I really don't care what you do. I really, as long as you're not infringing on somebody else's freedom, as long as you're not harming somebody else. You go live your life, and that's fine. I'm not going to impose the way I live my life on somebody else, but you're exactly right. That is what the left does, which is what is so annoying about the left. It's far worse than annoying, but they've got to shove everything down your throat. Listen, I think we're a compassionate society. Transgenderism. Listen, I have compassion for people who, just aren't quite sure. Okay, but I don't think you impose that, and you certainly don't push transgenderism on children. Let them grow up to be an adult. Don't be pushing these ideologies on our young people.
I think that is going to be a hidden vote in this electorate. I don't think people are talking much about that, but there's a great consensus in excess of 75%. Senator Johnson, I want to conclude by talking about big tech. Nothing's going to happen. When you are reelected, and I am assuming the Republicans are going to get the majority because of the way the polls are going, will you have a committee chair that will have anything to do with big tech? Because we got to do something about this. I mean, we've just got to get some reasonable rules of the road imposed on big tech.
Well, we actually had a pretty good hearing in our Homeland Security where we had both current and former big tech executives. And I got the former ones to admit that big tech literally can impact elections. Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg didn't admit that back in October 2020. But it's obvious that big tech has massive power. More than 80% of Americans get their news fed to them by big tech. Something does have to be done. I think we do have to look to the private sector because legislatively, Democrats love the status quo. They like the fact that the big tech social media giants is on their side. So you're not going to get help from them, but we need to expose it. I think we did in our HISGAC hearing a couple weeks ago. But no, if we get the majority, if I survive the election, I'll be the chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and I've said I'll be like a mosquito in a nudist colony. It'll be a target-rich environment.
Would you look into, if you're the chairman of that committee, will you look into the Zuckerberg boxes? Because I get more questions. I don't think Mark intended to become a target of the right, but the Zuckerberg boxes was the most improvident investment I've ever seen by an American businessman, so high profile, so obviously considered to be left wing. Is that going to be a subject of your investigations, those Zuck boxes?
Well, certainly, what he did here in Wisconsin with pretty well taking over, for example, the Green Bay election system, his political hack had the key to the absentee ballot room. Gee, what could go wrong there, right? So it's pretty, listen, we need to investigate all kinds of things. So many things need to be exposed. The corruption within federal law enforcement, FBI, Department of Justice. There's, like I say, it's a target-rich environment, Hugh. Ron Johnson for Senate.com if you want to help me get reelected.
That's where I want to finish. Do you have the resources? Because they think you're the last vulnerable Republican. They really do. They've given up on Bud. They've given up basically on taking out any Republican, but they're after you still. What do you think?
Well, yeah, they hate me because I do expose their complicity, their corruption. So it's RonJohnsonSenate.com. They're not going to give up. I am the number one target. It's not fun being on the receiving end of all their lies, their character assassination, their distortion, but that's all the left has.
Senator, I got one question for you. I was on Brett Baer last week, and I went back and looked at your last two races. You ran 6 years ago. You ran 12 years ago. No one ever thought you were going to win, and you breezed past Russ Feingold by 5 and 3.5 points, respectively. He was sort of a moderate leftist. Mandela Barnes is way to the left of Russ Feingold. Do you think the polls are wrong yet again in Wisconsin?
Well, right now they have me up, and it's because for the last 5 or 6 weeks we've finally been able to show Wisconsinites who Mandela Barnes is. But we have to pay to get the truth out. The truth should win. I'm doing everything I can so the truth prevails, but we need the resources to get the truth out there because we're not getting helped by the mainstream media who are in the back pocket of the radical left themselves. So RonJohnsonSenate.com. If we get the truth out, I should be able to save this U.S. Senate seat.
Ron Johnson for Wisconsin.com. Spell out FOR, Senator?
Yeah, forsenate.com. Yep.
For Senate. Ron Johnson for Senate.com. No one ever needs a radio host to do the website wrong. Ron Johnson for Senate.com. Thank you, Senator. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Josh Kraushaar is with Axios, one of the fair-minded reporters inside the Beltway. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Hugh.
36 days of the election. The latest poll over at Real Clear Politics shows Adam Laxalt with a lead over Cortez Masto. I just talked to Ron Johnson, who feels pretty good about Wisconsin, where Mandela Barnes is in hiding, like John Fetterman. What's your sense of the race for the Senate, Josh?
You mentioned the two races that are moving the most in the Republican Party's direction. I mean, Hugh, there have been 5 public polls in Nevada since September. Not a single one has shown Senator Cortez Masto ahead. That usually is as bad as it gets if you're an incumbent and you're down at this early stage or with a month to go to the election. Nevada's easily the best Republican pickup opportunity on the map. Wisconsin, I wrote about Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes has proven to be a flawed candidate, very, very progressive. He's being attacked on the crime issue and his position on bail. That's damaged his political standing badly in Wisconsin, and Ron Johnson looks like a small favorite at this point. In Pennsylvania, I mean, that's a race that is probably going to be the race that decides the majority, potentially, with Dr. Oz and John Fetterman. And Oz was down double digits in August. And, again, the crime issue has been front and center against Fetterman in that race. And both Republicans and Democrats I've talked to think Fetterman still has a small lead, but it's within the margin of error, and the momentum is with Oz. So there's a lot of undecideds in that race, too. People are still trying to figure out who they're going to support. So that's going to be a late-breaking race in Pennsylvania, and it's a lot closer than a lot of people think.
I personally feel very good about Georgia because it's been nationalized. It's left versus right, red versus blue. I also feel very good about Joe O'Dea, and I'm not even sure that Tiffany Smiley can't pull off an upset, though that Washington State is impossible to figure out because it's such a schizophrenic state. But the Hill today has a story on Joe O'Dea in Colorado, and like Cortez Masto in Nevada, Michael Bennet is invisible, and I think it is catching up with him, Josh.
Yeah, that's the sleeper race. If it's a wave, if we see a better than expected Republican performance across the board, if they get 25 House seats, if the Senate flips early, you're going to be keeping a close eye on Colorado because, Bennet is around the high 40s in the polls I've seen. He's leading. The state is obviously voted for Biden by double digits, but there are a lot of independent voters in Colorado as well, and it's got some swinginess to it. O'Dea is one of the stronger Republican Senate candidates, probably the most moderate Republican Senate candidate other than Smiley running. So that is one that's I still think Bennett has an advantage, but if we're seeing on the East Coast some of these races break to Republicans, we're going to be paying close attention to that Colorado Senate race.
Yeah, now talk to me a little bit about what Susan Collins said over the weekend, which is that she's afraid that someone's going to shoot a senator and that the level of the rhetoric and the violence. I mean, Donald Trump's attack on Mitch McConnell is another irresponsible tweet that, it's among his most infamous. Attacking Mitch is one thing, but attacking his own labor secretary completely another, and in ways that encourage discrimination against Chinese Americans. I just think that the rhetoric is a little out of control, Josh, and Susan Collins is right.
She's absolutely right. I mean, we've lost a whole lot of perspective over the last, 5 years in terms of our politics. The rhetoric's out of control. You're seeing violent threats. New York Times had a really good report over the weekend. Violent threats on both sides. I mean, I was sort of surprised. I think they said about a third of the actual threats that led to an indictment or led to some kind of legal action were from people on the right, but also about a quarter of the threats are from the left. So it's not that you're seeing it on the extremes on both sides. And look, you can see in the just looking at look at these primaries on both sides across the country, where you have a lot of energy on the extremes, and that's something that both parties have been trying to figure out and how to mitigate that element in our politics. But the problem is, I will say that the problem is when you have someone like Trump, making a death threat essentially against Senator McConnell, and you don't have Republicans speaking out against it. That creates a permission structure. That creates it doesn't have, you're not seeing the leadership or the gatekeepers that are saying, let's stop this nonsense, let's stop this extremism, let's talk common sense.
Look, the particular delicacies of responding to the president without making it worse that weigh on Leader McConnell is real. It's long been, this is the first time it's broken down. In fact, in my 30 plus years in the media, never talk about death threats has been the number one issue. And we know why, because there are copycats like the one who tried to kill all the Republicans on the softball field or the assassin outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house. We know and we don't talk about it, but the rhetoric has gotten so extreme. I don't think it's necessarily important to attack Donald Trump. I think just people have to start doing fair-minded assessments of political violence on both the left and the right, so that in every article, what you just said is repeated. It's the 0.5% on either end of the bell curve, Josh, that ought to worry the rest of the 99% of the country.
Yeah, and I agree. And the other part of the New York Times story, which was well reported, almost all these cases are involving mentally ill people. And we're seeing this with the crime situation. By the way, there was a great story in the New York Daily News today. Like all these crazy violent incidents on the subway, it's almost all mentally ill people. And that is a bipartisan cause that I think Republicans and Democrats should get behind, dealing with how to deal with this scourge of people who are schizophrenic and mentally ill and doing a lot of crazy things.
And prone to violence. Josh Kraushaar, it's a small percentage of people who are mentally ill who are prone to violence, but certainly we got to keep our hopes and prayers up about them. Josh, thank you. Hey, Ronna McDaniel. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good to have you back.
Good morning. Always great to be with you, Hugh.
I want to begin with your townhall.com column from last week. On top of worsening crime and inflation, newly released Custom and Border Protection data shows that more than 2 million illegal immigrants have been caught crossing the border over the last year. That number is historic, you wrote. It's just a fraction of the more than 4.4 million illegal immigrants who have crossed the border since Biden came into office, including 850,000 gotaways who have escaped undetected into our country. Chairwoman McDaniel, how often does the border come up in the campaigns that you are helping across the country?
I'd say it's a top 3 or 4 issue. It depends on which state. If you're in Arizona or Nevada or Texas, it's a number one issue. I think people are horrified that the Biden administration has let the border be unsecure. And the big issue I think people are talking about is the drugs, the fentanyl that's coming across. Everyone I know or everyone I talk to has come across somebody who's been impacted by this fentanyl crisis that is ravaging our country right now. And especially this new rainbow fentanyl has a lot of parents concerned heading into the Halloween holiday.
Yeah, indeed. They're going to have to check their kids' candy very, very close. I can't imagine the kind of malice it would require, but mistakes get made. And boy, that would be a deadly one. So, Chairwoman McDaniel, I have always said, I say again and again on this show, whenever I show up on Brett Baer's show, the issues set for Republicans are inflation, crime, the border, education, in that order, then China. I tell everyone, don't vote for a single school board member about whom you are not absolutely certain that they will keep schools open and masking voluntary, and who will not campaign against woke. How big is that last issue? Even though it's not typically a federal issue, I see it now showing up in conversations with campaigns and candidates.
Oh, it's a big issue. I was just in California campaigning for Scott Baugh and Brian Marriott in Orange County. And the big issue I heard about all across the state was the school board races. And in Michigan, it's a big issue. I think a lot of parents, especially in the lockdown states, Hugh, not as much in the states where they were open, where we had Republican governors like Florida and Iowa and across the country, but the lockdown states like Michigan and California, Nevada, it's a big issue, school board is, because I think parents finally realized the impact on these kids and the power that these school boards had to shut our schools down and mask our kids up.
You got to give me an update on my friend Scott Baugh's campaign. Scott, I have known for probably 25 years. He's up against Katie Porter, who is a liberal left-winger from the University of California, Irvine. She's got a sweetheart deal from UCI to keep her house. She has attacked the police in Irvine. She is an odd person. How does Scott feel about his chances in my old home?
I think he feels good. Orange County, we flipped 2 seats in 2020. We want to make it flip 4 or flip 2 more to get 4 this cycle. Scott's running a good campaign. As you mentioned, Katie Porter not only is a professor, but she writes books and then forces her students to buy them. So she's making money off of her students by selling her book. I mean, she really is a terrible, terrible candidate. She's got a cash on hand advantage, but Scott is working really hard, and the House committee's coming in and supporting him. So he's got a chance.
So, Chairwoman McDaniel, I want to talk about the Senate. You've been unsuccessful, as I have been, in persuading the former president not to attack Mitch McConnell, who does a great job, but that's not your problem. I want to talk to you about the Senate races, which are most competitive. Ron Johnson was just on, and Ron Johnson feels pretty good. Adam Laxalt is ahead in Nevada, according to the latest polling. I think Joe Day's coming up, Tiffany Smiley coming up. I think Herschel's in great shape, and I think Oz is actually ahead of Fetterman if we adjust for the bias in the polls. That looks good to me to put the Senate back in Republican hands. Same with you?
Yes, it does. And I said this in the summer when, there were reports that the Republicans were DOA on the Senate and the polls showed us out of reach. And I really felt like those polls were intended to suppress investment in our Senate races. And I held calls with our top investors saying, do not walk away. The polls are going to tighten in the fall. We are in a good position to take back the Senate. It's going to be neck and neck up until Election Day, so everyone needs to go support these candidates still so they can stay on TV. I would say Blake Masters can win. He needs support. And Ted Budd is another one who can win. But we need to keep them on through the finish line. And when we talk about the issues that matter, we win. And then when we contrast with their candidates who are very pro-criminal in their policies, cashless bail, let's release the prisoners, people like Mandela Barnes and Fetterman, voters really don't like that.
Well, Raphael Warnock is just as liberal as those two. We have got the 3 most radical Democrats ever nominated by their parties in Raphael Warnock, John Fetterman, and Mandela Barnes. And I don't believe it sells in America. I do not believe cashless bail and non-prosecution of violent crime is a starter. It's absolute. It's nuts, and Americans are afraid to be in their own homes.
Oh, exactly. And then you see, these criminals looting stores, small businesses, people who put their life and their savings and everything into building that small business, and these politicians who are just fine with these stores being robbed in broad daylight, getting rid of our police department. The RNC put together a 7-minute reel of all the top Democrats calling for defunding the police, from Nancy Pelosi to Kamala Harris, and now they're trying to backtrack. But their rhetoric and their policies have already done damage. Crime is up across the country because of what they've done. Our police departments have been ravaged. They can't recruit. And as a result, our communities are less safe. And I think the American people are done with it. And their eyes are wide open as to what this woke, progressive movement means. It means your communities will not be safe.
I think they're also done with the media, Ronna McDaniel. By that I mean legacy media that does not report. They are giving Mandela Barnes, John Fetterman, Raphael Warnock, Cortez Masto, Patty Murray a pass on the filibuster. They all want to kill it. Maggie Hassan wants to kill the filibuster. It's radical. They want to expand the Supreme Court. That's radical. They want up to the end of pregnancy abortion. That's radical. They want to count by race and limit the upward mobility of Asian Americans via the imposition of caps on their admission. It's a radical party, but we don't see that. Instead, we see articles this morning about how the Supreme Court is moving to the right. It's not. It's actually just going back to the Constitution.
Exactly. I mean, imagine, Hugh, if Republicans were running on getting rid of the filibuster. The media would be going nuts, because when Donald Trump mentioned it when he was president, the media went haywire. Okay, so they're fine with it if it's the Democrats. They're not fine with it when it's the Republicans. I think we should keep the filibuster. I think it's important, and it slows down legislation and gives time to create bipartisanship. But it is crazy, the media, how biased they've been towards the Democrats. And let's just not talk about the radical proposals they have. They've already done radical things. The student loan forgiveness that they did, instead of sending money to help with the kids who have deficits coming out of the pandemic, and then the 87,000 IRS agents. That was their priority, not getting more police on the street, not getting more border agents. They had an opportunity to fix the problems they're pretending that they want to solve right now, and they didn't. Instead, they got 87,000 new IRS agents.
Ronna, I want to talk about that. They have hired 87,000 new IRS employees. They're not all going to be agents, but we get the point. But that was a choice. And the president's decision to spend $400 billion was a choice, but it's an unconstitutional choice. No one has the authority to do what Joe Biden has done. The largest single expenditure of money in the history of America by a president. Does that come up? It's just so unfair. It's picking winners, but it's also so wildly unconstitutional.
Well, I think when you put it in contrast with what they could have done, then voters get really upset. When moms hear that nine-year-olds are reading at a 30-year low and doing math at a 30-year low, when we know we have absenteeism at a 70% high, chronic absenteeism, when we know 1 million kids didn't show up to school at all last year, and the Democrats caused that, and instead of saying, how do we help the kids we left behind, they said, let's give a cash grab to people who've already graduated from college. You know why? Because they can vote, and 5-year-olds can't, and 9-year-olds can't. It shows how wrong their party is and how wrong their priorities are. And they give lip service to a lot of issues. But when they have the reins of power, which they have, Senate, House, and White House they have, when they have the reins of power, they aren't fixing anything that the American people care about. Gas prices are high. Our inflation is up. Crime is up. The border's out of control. Drugs are coming across our border. And our kids have been left behind with their catastrophic Democrat failures.
Chairwoman McDaniel, where do people support the Republican National Committee? Where do they go if they want to contribute?
GOP.com. We can use all the support you can give. They are outraising us, and we're trying to make sure we have all the resources to win on Election Day. GOP.com.
Thank you, Chairwoman McDaniel. Always a pleasure. Keep coming back. 36 days to go. We're in the final sprint, and it's looking good for the Republicans because the Democrats are just wrong. It's that simple. They've got the wrong answers. They're not even asking the right questions. Joe O'Dea has got them so worried in Colorado. That makes me the happiest. Joe has got them sweating bullets in the Centennial State. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. America, I'm Hugh Hewitt. David Rubenstein is the New York Times bestselling author of How to Lead, other great books, The American Experiment. He's the co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the famous investment groups in the United States. David has a new book out, How to Invest, that is deeply invested in financial literacy. And I really want people to listen up here, because if you get this right at the beginning of your life, by the end of your life, you'll be secure. David, good morning. How are you? Oh, David, good morning. How are you?
How are you?
I am great. I love How to Invest because it's all about financial literacy. If I can begin on page 63 with John W. Rogers. First of all, would you tell people who John W. Rogers is? It's a fascinating interview you did with him, but he's also got an amazing backstory.
John W. Rogers is an African-American who went to Princeton, captain of the basketball team. 2 years after graduating from Princeton, started the first what is now the largest African-American investment company in the United States, Ariel Capital. It's now co-CEO'd by him and Melody Hobson.
Now, I got to tell you, when you asked him, weren't you a little bit young to start your own financial investment firm? He responded, my father bought stocks for me every birthday and every Christmas after I was 12. By the time I was 24, I had 12 years of experience making a lot of mistakes before I started Ariel, which is his firm. David Rubenstein, dads who teach their kids about investing are really doing a service to them. I am deeply concerned at the financial illiteracy in our country.
Well, I agree. Right now, many people don't really understand the difference between a stock and a bond, and many people don't learn anything about business very early. And now many people have pension funds and 401ks, and they don't really know what they're doing with it. And sadly, point I wanted to make, though, about the book is that those people that are good investors are really helping our country, because by allocating capital in an appropriate way, you can make the country better. For example, the venture capitalists who started and gave money to Moderna, did a really good job helping us start a company that was going to, that ultimately provided the vaccine that we needed. So I think people who are wealthy, people that invest, may be criticized by some for making a lot of money, but the truth is they give the bulk of the money away, and secondly, they're actually doing something good for the country by allocating capital in ways that makes the country better, in my view.
I like to remind people as well, it was joint stock companies that got America started in Virginia and Plymouth plantation.
Correct.
All joint stock companies. David, let's talk about your first investment. In a futures contract that the Colts would beat the Jets in the Super Bowl in 1969. I can't believe that was your last sports bet, but I love the line in there. That was your last sports bet. What do you think about the rise of online gaming and the rather casual disappearance of millions of dollars every weekend from middle-income investors' lives?
Well, I have not actually bet on another sports thing since then. I'd resolved never to do it again, and I haven't. But the truth is, if people enjoy betting, I don't say it's necessarily a sin for them to do it by getting some enjoyment from it. It isn't something I would enjoy, but I do think some of the money could be better spent in other ways, and I think some people probably put too much in to betting. In other words, if you spend half of 1% of your net worth on betting each year and you lose it, it's not the end of the earth. You spend 10 or 20% on it, you can really hurt your family and your children.
David, I always tell people Las Vegas isn't built. They don't build anything there. They don't make it. Las Vegas exists because people go there and leave their money behind. If those people invested it in ways that you discuss and how to invest where we're going right now, they'd be a lot better off. It comes down to being a good investor. David Rubenstein's Notes on Investing is the very first chapter. Don't count on good luck. Good luck can actually be bad luck if it occurs too early. I like you quoting Jim Bakker's father. Prior preparation prevents poor performance, because Peter Baker did that biography of Jim Baker.
Right.
And I learned that is his mantra. Boy, does that apply to investing.
That's true. I mean, if you really prepare for anything, you can do reasonably well. Certainly prepare. It helps in investing. The best investors in our country do a lot of work. It's not luck just sitting in front of a screen and just guessing to buy this stock or that stock. They really do invest. They really do research, and they know what they're doing.
David, I never give investment advice because I'm not a professional. I'm a broadcaster and a lawyer. You're a professional. What do you make about people, you actually declaim against it in the book, who just decide they're going to go to Robinhood and guide their own investments?
Well, it's a fool's errand to some extent. I mean, I think the truth is you should probably use somebody that knows what they're doing. I mean, if you were a good athlete, you wouldn't just all of a sudden expect somebody who's a financial person to be a good athlete. It takes preparation. You have to really know what you're doing. And as a general rule in life, people that know what they're doing and are reasonably intelligent will do better than people that don't know what they're doing and are not that intelligent. So find people who are hardworking, know what they're doing, and they can advise you. That's my view.
And you can trust. It's also the view of Larry Fink, Ron Barron, a lot of these people that you talk to about the basic baskets of investment, cash, bonds, stock, and real estate. Again and again, they tell you there are experts out there. Do not go off on flyers. I'm going to get to crypto eventually, but let's start with cash. David, people can't hold cash now, can they? It's going to lose 10% a year in its value.
Well, because of inflation, you will probably lose money. That's correct. So cash is not something that is a great asset right now because inflation's so high. You need to get a better return than the inflation rate.
Larry Fink tells you the most common mistake being made right now, you offer it up to him. Is it, are they investing in too much one thing, or are they relying on headlines? Fink picks headlines and says they may be making that mistake right now. We get accustomed to an economic environment. We assume that environment will last forever. First question, how much do you let the day-to-day news cycle impact your investments?
Well, it doesn't affect me that much because I'm in the long-term business. But obviously, you don't like seeing headlines about the stock market going down. But the truth is, the biggest mistake that investors generally make is when markets are going up, they rush in to buy stocks, and when markets are going down, they rush to sell what they have. That's the opposite of what you should do. Right now, markets are depressed. There's no doubt about it. But markets always come back in this country. And if you hold on for a while, you'll avoid the transaction costs and the taxes associated with selling things. So I think it's better not to look at the newspaper headlines every half hour and worry about the markets going up and down. Warren Buffett is not sitting there worrying about the stock market going up and down.
Conversation, which surprised, I think you, it surprised me. He manages his own money. Larry Fink has got this enormous armada of analysts, and yet he makes his own choices with his own money. What does that tell you, David?
Well, he's a smart guy. He's got really good people. It's a little bit misleading to say he's managing his own money. He's got the best people in the world helping to advise him. So he's basically, I think, listening to these advisors and kind of telling them what to do with his money. But he's basing what he's doing based on the really good information they have.
Ron Barron tells you a similar thing about not buying and selling. He also tells you on page 59 that an unnamed person told him, don't worry about earnings per share. They make up those numbers. Worry about sales. Do you agree with that?
Well, to some extent, I mean, earnings per share will drive a stock price. But, if a company's got really good revenues, eventually earnings will come around, as Jeff Bezos proved. People made fun of him for a while not having enough earnings, and then eventually he got enough market share that he could make some earnings out of it. So earnings per share is a little bit misleading. And also, you should recognize that if you have a lot of revenue, eventually you will get earnings.
Let's also talk, David Rubenstein, about John Gray, Chief Operating Officer at Blackstone. I love the fact that he began in real estate because he just heard someone say, what do you think? And though someone happened to be Steven Schwartzman.
Right.
So that's a good person to say, okay, I'll take your nudge. I think the most important words anyone ever hears, have you ever considered, and I know a guy because they're invitations to do something. Do you think many people would have taken the choice he did to go into the new real estate group at Blackstone when he was a youngster?
Probably not, but he went into it, and as the story unfolded, he built the largest single real estate business in the world, and it now has about $250 billion under management at Blackstone, and he rose up to now be the president of Blackstone. So he did very well, but he worked hard over 25, 30 years to build that real estate business.
And I want people to go back to when he gets the offer. I was mostly running numbers, doing pitch book for clients, and ordering dinner. I had to make sure the associates got their food by 7 p.m. He started humble. He's now running the largest real estate investment firm in the world. That is not an uncommon story in the pages of How to Invest, David.
Right. I think humility is a good virtue. Obviously, there's some investors that maybe brag a little bit too much, but generally, most of the people that I interviewed are people that made losses, had mistakes, had things not work out, and they learned a lot from it, and they learned a lot about humility. Warren Buffett isn't running around saying, I'm the greatest investor in the world. He just lets his actions speak for himself.
The quote I took away from John Gray, best investment advice he ever received, be a high conviction investor. When you see something, single family housing, global logistics, the movement of everything online, you lean into that, and that's when you have the best outcomes. Explain how you view high conviction investing.
Well, that's a rule that George Soros also had over the years, too, which is if you have a really, really good idea and you really know what you're doing, don't just then say asset allocate a little bit to it. Really put a fair amount of money into it because it's rare that great ideas come along. When you have a great idea and you really have a high conviction about it, put your assets into that.
In the conversation, you just made me think of Michael Moritz, former journalist, partner at Sequoia from Wales, a Jew from Wales. You don't run into many of those. He said to you, we always thought it was rarely ever too late to get into a good investment. I think that's profound. You want to expand on that?
Yes, I mean, if it's a good investment, you may not be there on the ground floor, but it's still a good company. So sometimes his company, Sequoia, which is the leading venture capital firm in the United States now, they come in not in the first round necessarily or the seed round, but they come in the second and third or fourth round, but they're still getting in at good prices because it's a good company, and good companies will ultimately get to a really good value.
David Rubenstein, you also asked Moritz about how do people get to make a pitch to Sequoia. He says they get about 1,000 inquiries a year, and they do 10 deals. So that's generally got to be Carlyle's position as well. How do you pick which ones to go deep into when everyone is pitching you?
Well, you get lots of stuff over the transom, and after a while you have experience in what is really a waste of time and what is really going to be meaningful. And then when you meet the people who are running the idea of the company, you can determine whether they have some experience, whether they know what they're doing, whether they have the hunger and the drive and the intellect to push it through. And that's what you're paying for when you invest with a venture firm is their judgment. But it's rarely the case that somebody has a great idea, has a great talent, and venture capital investors are going to pass on that. They know what they're doing generally.
Now, in the book, you ask one of your, I think it's Ron, if I have $100,000, what should I do with it? And he doesn't answer by beginning what I thought he should say. It depends on where you are in life. If you're a qualified investor, that's a completely different question than if it's your only $100,000, isn't it?
Right. Of course.
If it's only $100,000, go safety and go growth long term. But if it's $100,000 you can afford to lose, what do you have them put it into now, David Rubenstein?
Well, if you can afford to lose it, then obviously you can take a higher risk. And if you're trying to get a higher rate of return, depends on what your status is in life. If you're retired, $100,000 means a lot to you. You need to get a solid return, and you're not going to lose that $100,000. Not losing your principal is one of the most important rules of investment. Don't lose what you already have. If you're really young and willing to take big risks, sure, you can take some venture capital flyers or some startup flyers. But as a general rule of thumb, for most people, losing money is not a good thing, and you should take a pretty safe, prudent course.
I want to go to Mark Anderson. You ask him about China. He is very clipped. We don't invest much there. Generally speaking, I see American capital withdrawing from the China market. Do you agree with that assessment, David?
It's not moving in very much right now, and it's very difficult to invest there right now. So for the time being, most American investors that I'm familiar with who have money there would like to get it out on a reasonable profit basis. They're not rushing to sell everything because it's not easy to sell everything. But right now, it's more challenging to invest in China than it was 10 years ago. There's no doubt about it.
How to Invest, David Rubenstein's new book, also has chapters on cryptocurrency, SPACs, infrastructure, ESG. I'm going to talk about that now, David, because it interests some people. But I have in my hand this morning's Financial Times. Retail investors warned on piling into risky alternative product. Asset managers cite pitfall at Finance Times conference as alts look beyond institutions for growth. I think that's a very wise caution, David. What do you think about that?
Well, right now, I'd say that retail investors are generally people that are not that sophisticated, they're not that experienced, and they should really follow good managers and try to not lose their money and diversify. So if you're a retail investor, I would probably go into things that are more traditional, stocks and bonds, know what you're doing. You can allocate a little bit of what you have, maybe 5 or 10% into the so-called alternatives, but make sure you know what you're doing and invest with really good people.
David, let's talk about cryptocurrencies. My advice, and I've been doing this show since 2000, 23 years. And when cryptocurrencies arrived, I said, don't buy anything you don't understand. I still tell people, don't buy anything you don't understand. But a lot of people like to gamble on cryptocurrencies. I don't. It's a fundamental departure from sound investing unless you can afford to lose that money.
Well, if you go to Las Vegas and you're smart, you know you're going to probably lose whatever you take with you, because that's what Las Vegas is about. So if you get the pleasure out of gambling, it's like going out to a good restaurant for you or going to a sporting event. If you get pleasure out of it and you can afford to lose 1% of your or 2% of your net worth, then you can invest in crypto and you'll still lose 1 or 2% perhaps. But you get the pleasure out of saying I invested in crypto, watch the screens and so forth. But if you really are trying to make large sums of money and know what you're doing, it's not easy to do in crypto. It can be a fool's errand.
It's very well explained in How to Invest. As our SPACs, as our infrastructure plays, but I want to conclude, David, by talking about ESG. I think it stands for evading scrutiny of governments, but a lot of people believe in it. This morning, also in the Financial Times, former Deputy Treasury Secretary Sarah Bloom Raskin warns about ESG distorting markets. What do you think about her warning?
I think ESG has gotten to the point where people are so obsessed with it that they ignore whether the underlying investment is as good as it should be. So ESG is a factor to be taken into account, but don't ignore the underlying quality of the company you're investing in and the economic situation you're investing in. And I think ESG is now coming under some attack for people saying that people are focused only on ESG and not the quality of the investment.
I want to conclude by talking to you about outliers. I'm trying to find the exact quote, and I think it came in your conversation with Moritz. It might have come in your conversation with John Gray. I'm not sure, or maybe Mark Anderson. Somebody said the outliers are where you make the money. Has that been Carlyle Group's view?
Generally, great investors go against conventional wisdom. That's where you perform what other people are, you go where other people are not going. Carlyle is a more traditional investment firm, and we tend not to take undue risks. So we tend to go with more conventional kinds of things. But there are firms that are much more on the outer edge than we are, venture firms or firms that do seed investing. That's not what has been our forte generally. We tend to be more conventional in what we do, more bread and butter kind of things.
All right, let me close by thanking you for hiring Glenn Youngkin whenever you did that. I assume
Okay.
you were part of the decision to hire our
I
governor.
hired him 25 years ago. I recruited him to Carlyle. Yes.
Isn't that's terrific? Did you ever see in him a future governor of Virginia and possible presidential candidate?
Well, didn't when I first hired him. I didn't, but now I do. So you never know.
It's interesting. A lot of politicians go into finance, but very few financiers go into politician. Am I right about
correct.
that?
Glenn is a very talented person.
When you hire for Carlyle, when you're looking for the future great investors who will be interviewed by a future David Rubenstein for the 30 years down the road book, How to Invest in 2050, what do you look for in a young person who wants to go to work for you?
I want intelligence, drive, humility, willingness to do something to help the country at some point with some free time or free money they might have, and somebody wants to give back to society. But I'm looking for somebody that's actually has a drive with them, and they really want to do something with their life, not just make money.
So last question. Michael Moritz had no financial background. He's a journalist. He's become a brilliant investor. Do you have to have quantitative skills to get hired at Carlyle?
No, I don't have them myself. I have no quantitative skills. I'm a lawyer by training. No, we're looking for people that are smart, have accomplished something, and that really want to work hard to make something of themselves and to enjoy the game of investing with the idea that what you're doing in investing is helping to build the country, helping companies get stronger. And that's what we're looking for. You can teach people math and quantitative skills in a relatively short period of time if they need to learn that skill.
That is my view. I agree with you completely. That's why I liked How to Invest. David, thank you for your time. I think got another New York Times bestseller on it. Be well.